There comes a moment in every human life when the weight of pretending becomes too heavy to carry. A moment when the mask slips, the smile fades, and the truth you've been whispering to yourself finally demands to be heard. And that moment, whether gentle or devastating, is the moment you choose yourself above all else. Most people think choosing yourself is selfish, but the real selfishness is abandoning your soul just to be accepted in rooms that don't even want your truth. When you finally choose yourself, something extraordinary happens. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop shrinking your voice so others can feel comfortable in their smallness. You stop pretending you're fine while quietly bleeding behind closed doors. You stop negotiating your worth with people who never had the capacity to see it. Choosing yourself begins with a simple but terrifying question. What do I truly want? Not what your family expects, not what society rewards, not what keeps the peace. What you want. And when you answer honestly, you feel the ground shift. The first transformation is internal. Your intuition, once ignored, dismissed, or drowned out by the noise of the world, becomes the authority of your life. The voice that once whispered grows loud enough to guide your decisions, your boundaries, your direction. You start trusting the discomfort that warns you. You start embracing the clarity that calls you. For the first time, your inner voice doesn't need permission to speak. Then another shift happens. You take your power back. The power that leaked away through over-explaining, over-giving, over-sacrificing. The power you handed to people who mistook your kindness for naivety. You reclaim it piece by piece, breath by breath. And when you do, something shocking becomes clear. Some people were only comfortable with you when you were tired, silent, or uncertain. The moment you choose yourself, the moment you stand tall, they feel threatened, not because you harmed them, but because you stopped harming yourself for them. Don't take their discomfort personally. Your growth confronts the places where they refuse to grow. Your courage highlights their fear. Your boundaries expose their dependence on your lack of boundaries. Choosing yourself does not destroy relationships, it reveals them. As you step deeper into your truth, your world begins to reshape itself around you. The life that once felt tight, suffocating, or directionless begins to loosen its grip. You stop forcing what doesn't fit. You stop chasing what runs. You stop waiting for people who never intended to meet you in the middle. You realize you no longer have to earn your right to be heard. You no longer have to justify your dreams. You no longer have to shrink to be chosen. Because you finally understand, choosing yourself is not rejecting others. It is refusing to reject your own soul. And then comes the most powerful shift of all. You become someone you can live with, stand with, breathe with. You look in the mirror and feel a strange, quiet pride, not the pride of achievement, but the pride of alignment. The pride of knowing I stayed true, I stayed awake, I stayed honest. You learn to enjoy your own company. You realize solitude is not loneliness. It is the meeting place between your past self, who suffered, your present self who awakens, and your future self who rises. You become your own home. And from that place, something magnificent happens. Life opens. New people arrive, people who don't fear your voice. New opportunities come, those that resonate with your real identity. New paths appear, ones that lead you toward your becoming, because the universe expands for those who refuse to shrink for others. There is a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from betraying your inner voice, not the tiredness of a long day or the weariness that follows hard work, but the spiritual fatigue that builds every time you silence the truth inside you. For years, you convince yourself that ignoring your instincts is the mature thing to do, the responsible thing, the peaceful thing. You tell yourself that your discomfort is an overreaction, that your needs are too much, that your desires are unrealistic. You start abandoning the compass within you because the world around you seems to demand it. But there comes a moment, quiet or volcanic, when you realize that every time you mute your inner voice, you dim your own existence. You shrink, you fracture, you slowly become a stranger to yourself. When you stop betraying your inner voice, the first thing you feel is relief. Not the kind that comes from solving a problem, but the kind that comes from removing a mask you've worn for too long. Suddenly, your breath deepens. Your shoulders drop. Your heartbeat slows into its natural rhythm. You feel a returning to yourself, to your truth, to the person you were before the world taught you to edit your authenticity. Your inner voice is not just a feeling. It is the accumulated wisdom of your lived experiences. The intuition that has protected you, the quiet knowing that rises when everything else becomes loud. It is the part of you that sees through false intentions long before your mind can articulate why. It is the instinct that senses danger, dishonesty, or misalignment before any facts appear. It is the guide that tries to redirect you every time you drift toward people who drain you, or paths that diminish you. For most of your life, you learn to ignore this voice. You were taught to prioritize harmony over truth, acceptance over authenticity, and politeness over self-respect. You learned to smile when you were hurting, to stay silent when something felt wrong, to tolerate situations your soul was begging you to leave. Every time you dismissed your intuition, you sent yourself a message that your inner world didn't matter, that your truth was negotiable, that your safety, peace, and clarity were secondary to someone else's comfort. But the moment you stop betraying your inner voice, everything changes. You begin to notice the small signals you used to override, the tension in your chest around certain people, the heaviness that appears when a situation no longer serves you, the subtle excitement that pulses when a direction is right for you. You become more receptive to your emotional cues, your physical sensations, your energetic shifts. You start realizing your intuition has been speaking, whispering, warning, guiding, long before your rational mind catches up. And with every moment you honor that voice, you rebuild trust with yourself. You start setting boundaries without guilt because your inner voice tells you when something is not aligned. You walk away from environments that drain your spirit because your intuition shows you the truth beneath the appearances. You stop chasing people who give you mixed signals because your inner knowing refuses to be confused anymore. You stop participating in conversations that feel like self-betrayal because your internal compass refuses to point you toward anything that diminishes your worth. This shift doesn't make your life easier at first. It makes it clearer. You begin to see who respects your truth and who only liked you because you silenced it. You begin to see which situations depended on your self-abandonment. You begin to see the cost of ignoring your inner world, and with that clarity comes power. You become less reactive and more responsive. You stop explaining your decisions to people who benefit from your confusion. You stop doubting your instincts just because others don't understand them. You stop apologizing for feeling what you feel, knowing that your intuition rarely lies. The world may not always support your inner voice, but your life starts transforming the moment you do. Your choices become cleaner. Your relationships become more honest. Your direction becomes more aligned. You no longer move out of fear, pressure, or expectation. You move from truth. And slowly, beautifully, you become someone you can trust again. There is a moment in life when you look back and realize how many pieces of yourself you handed out just to keep the peace. How many times you stayed silent so someone else could speak louder. How often you dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel small. How repeatedly you said yes when your soul was screaming no. You don't lose your power all at once. You lose it in tiny, almost invisible ways, one compromise at a time, one swallowed truth at a time, one ignored boundary at a time. Reclaiming your power begins with acknowledging that you gave it away. Not because you were weak, but because you were taught to survive by pleasing, accommodating, blending in, or enduring. You were conditioned to believe that strength meant being agreeable, selfless, endlessly forgiving, endlessly patient. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that your power was never meant to be outsourced to anyone else, not to their approval, not to their validation, not to their comfort. When you start taking that power back, life begins to shift in ways both subtle and seismic. Power returns first as awareness. You start noticing how drained you feel after certain conversations. You start observing how tense your body becomes around certain people. You realize how often you adjust your personality, soften your truth, or shrink your presence to avoid conflict. You begin to see that the power you lost wasn't stolen. It was traded for acceptance that never nourished you. Then comes the second layer, clarity. You begin to understand that not everyone deserved what you gave. Some people benefited from your uncertainty. Some relied on your inability to say no. Some found comfort in your hesitation because it allowed them to control the dynamic. When you reclaim your power, their reaction often reveals who they truly were, grateful for your presence or dependent on your silence. Reclaiming your power doesn't start with grand gestures. It starts with small acts of self-respect. You say, I need time to think, instead of rushing into decisions that don't align with you. You pause before agreeing to things that drain your energy. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop apologizing for feelings that are valid. You stop accepting blame just to keep the peace. Each small act is a quiet revolution. Each boundary is a declaration that your life belongs to you again. As you reclaim your power, you start walking differently, not arrogantly, but consciously. You stop entering rooms asking, will they like me? And instead ask, do I feel safe here? Do I feel respected here? You begin evaluating people not by how much they want from you, but by how much they honor your energy, your time, your truth. You begin to choose yourself without guilt. You begin to protect your peace without justification. You begin to prioritize your well-being without apology. And something profound happens along the way. Your confidence returns. Not the loud, performative kind, but the grounded confidence of someone who knows they no longer need external permission to exist. You trust your decisions more. You trust your instincts more. You trust your worth more. You stop negotiating your value with people who couldn't see it. There's a liberation that comes with this shift not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because it becomes honest. You stop participating in dynamics that require your self-betrayal. You stop giving emotional discounts to people who never paid full price. You stop carrying responsibilities that were never yours. You stop being the emotional anchor for people who wouldn't throw you a rope if you were drowning. As your power returns, your relationships transform. Some deepen because those who genuinely care benefit from the stronger, clearer version of you. Others fall away because they depended on your absence of boundaries. Both outcomes serve your growth. Your path also changes. Opportunities you once felt unworthy of start calling your name. Decisions that once terrified you become easier. Choices that once paralyzed you become precise. Your inner world becomes your compass, not the expectations of those around you. Reclaiming your power is not loud, aggressive, or dramatic. It is steady. It is intentional. It is the quiet remembering of who you were before the world convinced you to forget. There comes a point in your life when the truth reveals itself, not through words, but through the way people react to your awakening. You begin to notice a pattern you once couldn't see. Some individuals were never truly comfortable with your growth, your clarity, or your power. They were comfortable with your silence. They were at ease with the version of you who didn't question, didn't challenge, didn't express needs, didn't set boundaries. They preferred the version of you who carried the weight quietly, who absorbed the discomfort quietly, who tolerated mistreatment quietly. And when you finally begin to rise, when your voice returns, when your self-respect sharpens, when your boundaries become visible, everything shifts. You start to realize that your silence was not peace, it was compliance. It was the invisible glue holding together relationships that could never have survived your truth. It was the unspoken agreement you get to stay as long as you don't disturb the illusion. People who loved your silence were often the same people who benefited from your lack of clarity. They relied on the softness of your "it's okay," the hesitation in your tone, the way you swallowed your pain rather than exposing it. When you were silent, they could shine brighter, not because they were truly brighter, but because you were dimming your own light to make their shadows disappear. But once you decide to honor your truth, something radical happens. You disrupt the balance that was built on your silence. You break the unspoken rule that said, your needs come last, your voice stays hidden. Suddenly, the dynamic changes. You stop nodding along to things that hurt you. You stop pretending to be comfortable in situations that crush your spirit. You stop offering emotional labor to people who think your heart is an endless resource. And it is in this shift that the discomfort becomes obvious. Some people withdraw. Some become defensive. Some criticize the new you, not realizing this version is the real you, the one you bury to preserve a relationship that was never mutual. Some say you've changed, when in truth you've simply stopped abandoning yourself for their convenience. You begin to see the subtle signs. The friend who celebrated you only when you were struggling, because your success made them feel insignificant. The family member who praised your humility but called you arrogant when you finally spoke up. The partner who loved your gentleness but felt threatened when you began asserting boundaries. The co-worker who admired your patience but resented you once you stopped tolerating disrespect. These revelations are painful, not because they expose others, but because they expose the truth of how much you minimized yourself to keep certain connections alive. You realize how many times you held your tongue to avoid conflict, how many moments you allowed disrespect to slide, how many times you played small just to keep others comfortable. When you reclaim your strength, you also reclaim your visibility. You stop hiding in the background of your own life. You start saying things like, "That doesn't work for me," or "I deserve better," or "This is my boundary." And the people who valued your silence more than your strength will often interpret your boundaries as betrayal, not because you betrayed them, but because you stopped betraying yourself. And still, this awakening brings a deeper clarity. Your strength does not diminish the right people. It inspires them. It invites them to rise with you. It creates healthier dynamics built on respect rather than dependence. Your strength doesn't threaten true connection, it purifies it. As you step into your power, you also start attracting people who respect your voice instead of fearing it. People who want to hear your thoughts, not silence them. People who can handle your truth, not demand your compliance. People who celebrate your strength because they are not weakened by it. You begin to see that your silence was never love. It was survival. Your silence was never harmony. It was avoidance. Your silence was never acceptance. It was self-abandonment. When you finally choose your strength, you understand that anyone who depends on your silence was never aligned with your soul. They were aligned with your suppression. And you were never meant to live as a muted version of yourself. There is a profound shift that happens the moment you stop living from expectation and start living from truth. When you finally choose to honor who you actually are, not who you were taught to be, not who others needed you to be, not who you pretended to be just to belong, your entire life begins to rearrange itself. Not instantly, not dramatically at first, but in quiet, undeniable ways. It's as though the world subtly pivots to catch up with your authenticity. This transformation begins internally. You start noticing that certain routines, conversations, and obligations no longer feel aligned. You feel an inner tightening when you're out of sync and a deep calm when you're being true to yourself. Suddenly, the things you tolerated for years become intolerable, not because they changed, but because you did. The false layers you carried, people-pleasing, self-doubt, self-censorship, begin to crack, and your real identity pushes its way through. As this identity emerges, your life starts reshaping around it. The first thing that shifts is your clarity. You stop settling for confusion. You stop second guessing your intuition. You stop pretending not to notice red flags. Your internal compass becomes stronger and your decisions become cleaner. You no longer choose based on fear, guilt, or obligation. You choose based on alignment. Then your relationships begin to change. You become aware of who genuinely supports your growth and who only supported the version of you that stayed small. Some relationships deepen because they can hold the weight of your authenticity. Others drift, not because anyone failed, but because the connection required you to suppress parts of yourself. As your real identity becomes more visible, the people who resonate with it begin to appear. People whose energy feels like home, whose presence feels effortless, whose values align with the direction of your soul. Life starts removing what no longer matches the frequency of who you're becoming. Your environment shifts too. Places you once felt comfortable in may now feel suffocating. Spaces that once drained you become impossible to stay in. You begin seeking environments that nourish your spirit rather than deplete it. This could mean rearranging your home, changing your routine, leaving a job that demands too much of your soul, or finally stepping into roles that match your deeper calling. And then comes your voice. It becomes stronger, clearer, less afraid. You start expressing your needs without apology. You begin choosing honesty over harmony. You stop sugarcoating your truth to protect the comfort of others. Your communication becomes a reflection of who you are, not who others expect you to be. With each real choice you make, your outer world begins mirroring your inner truth. You start attracting opportunities that align with your authenticity. Creative projects, career paths, friendships, partnerships, collaborations, life begins responding to your courage. It starts opening doors that remained invisible when you were living someone else's script. You notice another shift. Your energy changes. You no longer wake up feeling like you're performing a role. You feel lighter, more grounded, more connected to yourself. The exhaustion that once followed you begins to fade because you're no longer fighting your own nature. You're no longer resisting your own becoming. You feel a growing sense of peace, not because everything outside you is perfect, but because everything inside you is finally honest. Your identity becomes the foundation, not the mask. And from this foundation, your life reshapes with intention. You start choosing experiences that uplift you. You stop participating in dynamics that shrink your spirit. You become protective of your energy, your time, your heart. You begin prioritizing what brings you joy rather than what wins approval. This new alignment inevitably leads to expansion. New doors open. New paths reveal themselves. New versions of you begin emerging. Versions that were waiting, hidden beneath fear and conditioning. Your life becomes a reflection of your truth rather than a reaction to your past. You realize that growth is not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you were before the world convinced you to forget. And when you stand as your real identity, the world around you quietly rearranges itself to meet you where you truly are. There is a moment in your journey when the noise of the world becomes less important than the whisper of your own soul. A moment when you stop searching for validation outside yourself and begin cultivating a relationship with the person you meet in the mirror. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens after years of abandoning yourself, years of trying to earn love, years of molding your identity around what others needed from you. And then, slowly, you begin to recognize that the most important companionship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. When you choose authenticity over approval and truth over comfort, you begin turning inward. You begin meeting yourself in a deeper, more sacred way. At first, the silence feels unfamiliar. When you've spent a lifetime drowning yourself in noise, other people's opinions, other people's expectations, the chaos of the world, silence can feel threatening. It can feel like emptiness. It can feel like loneliness. But as you stay with it, you begin to notice something powerful. The silence is not empty. It is full of your presence, full of your unfiltered thoughts, full of the emotions you once avoided, full of the truth you buried beneath distraction. This is where the transformation begins, not in noise, but in quiet. As you sit with yourself, you start learning who you truly are beyond the layers of conditioning. You notice the dreams you silenced to fit into certain rooms. You hear the fears you pretended not to feel. You sense the intuition you ignored because it didn't match the narrative others had for you. In the stillness, you realize your inner world is rich, complex, and deeply alive, and slowly, something miraculous happens. You become someone you can trust. You begin treating yourself with honesty rather than criticism. You begin offering yourself compassion rather than judgment. You begin giving yourself time, space, and tenderness. You stop abandoning yourself in moments of discomfort. You stop running from your emotions. You stop silencing your needs. Instead, you face them with a courage you didn't know you had. You begin realizing that you alone are capable of holding yourself through the storms you once depended on others to carry. As this self-relationship deepens, you become less reactive to the chaos around you. The opinions of others lose their power. The pressure to impress fades. You no longer crumble when someone disapproves of your choices because you've built a foundation rooted in your own truth. You begin trusting your inner guidance more than external noise. You become your own safe place. There is a peace that comes from this. A peace that doesn't ask for permission, a peace that cannot be taken away by circumstances. You find comfort in your own company. You begin doing things alone without feeling lonely. You enjoy your solitude not as a retreat from the world, but as a homecoming to yourself. And as you stand with yourself, even in silence, your confidence grows. Not loud, fragile confidence that needs applause to survive, but quiet, grounded confidence that comes from knowing you will not abandon yourself again. You can sit in a room alone without feeling inadequate. You can walk away from people who hurt you without doubting your worth. You can make decisions without seeking approval because your internal voice has become your compass. This shift doesn't just change how you see yourself. It changes how you see the world. You begin choosing relationships based on depth rather than dependence. You begin prioritizing peace over chaos. You begin valuing authenticity over performance. People who once intimidated you no longer hold power over your emotions. People who once manipulated you no longer confuse you. People who once took advantage of your silence no longer have access to it. When you become someone you can stand with, even in silence, you stop fearing solitude. You stop feeling the need to fill every quiet moment with distraction. You stop seeking yourself in others and instead bring your full self into your interactions. You show up differently, calmer, clearer, more grounded. And this inner companionship becomes the anchor you carry everywhere. You know that no matter who comes or goes, no matter what shifts or changes, you are not alone, because you have returned to the one person who will walk with you through every season, every challenge, every transformation. The person you were always meant to stand beside